Thank you to everyone who is joining us. We are 533 people strong, something we did not anticipate when we thought about this series, but we are all grateful for you being here. And I saw people from all over the state of California. I saw folks from Berlin. I saw some other international folks. There's some folks from Austin. So again, thank you all for joining us. The seminar is going to be recorded. We're going to be capturing these videos and reimagining another way to also offer the seminar series as we move forward. So just so you know, mostly what we're going to be using in the recordings are going to be a way for me to capture some of the presentations that are being shared and the questions. But truly, what we're going to be holding on to are going to be the speaker's presentation and the conversation that we have, just so you know. And so whether you want to have your camera on and off, know that you won't be showing up without your permission beyond this conversation. So again, thank you all for coming to our series called Reimagining Urban Planning for Belonging, being hosted by the Othering and Belonging Institute, where I have the pleasure and privilege of calling my work home. Today, before we get started, I'm going to give you sort of a lay down of what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit of what I'm calling an introductory dissent. And it's intentionally called the dissent because it is much in critique and in contradiction to the way that urban planning here in the US particularly, and I know that folks are joining us internationally, but know that most of the conversation we're going to be having is based here in the US and how we operate in urban planning. If folks are interested in having these bridging conversations around urban planning and the ways it iterates in other parts of the world, open to that. So I'll be presenting an introductory dissent. We have Veronica Davis and Dr. Kafli Yato who are going to be giving presentations around some of the critical questions. Then we're going to send you off into breakout groups, and it's an opportunity for you to see who are other people that are lining with this conversation. So it allows for a little bit of networking, but it's a space to process what we're going to say. So you feel free during that time, and I'll definitely guide you into those spaces to share what's on your mind, what resonated, what other questions that you have. We'll be there for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for a Q&A. So just for the folks that I can see, how does that sound? Any thumbs up? Are we good? Are we ready? Awesome. So again, let me explain to you a little bit about what Reimagining Urban Planning for Belonging is. And it's a monthly series of public webinars that focus on the edge of innovation in urban planning and policy. Traditionally, urban planning has had a long legacy of harming communities of color, of developing and implementing racist policies, and the destruction of the built environment. This series openly critiques this current iteration of urban planning in the hopes of proposing new theories, strategies, and concepts that help us arrive at an iteration of the field where we all belong. We are interested in helping foster meaningful conversations among urban planners who are hungry for more and to engage with new audiences that have always been curious about urban planning, but may not know exactly what it is that we do. I mean, do any of us know what we do? Actually, that's the question. Some of the critical questions for this seminar include what is urban planning and who has historically benefited from the conventional definition of urban planning? What are some of the pitfalls and barriers to achieve equity in this current iteration of the planning field? What are the skills, competencies, and values missing from the field of urban planning but are necessary to achieve more equitable processes for those most impacted by the process? And lastly, what are past planning policies and practices that have caused harm for marginalized communities? What are their consequences? And what are examples that are working toward atonement? So with that, I'll open us into the introductory dissent. It feels like a whole very formal presentation. Now, folks know I'm not formal at all. But I was like, let me put some thoughts down because I could riff off and we'll go off for hours. So I was like, let me create some boundaries for me. I always say that there are two types of planners. There are planners who romanticize the city, and then there are planners who come in to try to defend their hood. Now, for the latter planners, when we come into the field, we realize that planning is not set up to teach us how to do that. I definitely was very lucky and fortunate that I did a dual degree in social work. So when I also went into the planning program as a social worker, I realized that there was a lot of room within the field to advocate on behalf of community, yet we as planners are not trained to advocate on behalf of communities. So again, like I mentioned, this series is intended to interrogate the current way we as planners have been trained, how we operate, and more importantly, how we perceive our relationship with the built environment and those who live within the built environment community. At the Institute, at OBI, we've been working very hard to think the ways in which belonging can become a global norm and the way that it manifests itself in different contexts. So truly, the true intention of these conversations is for us to have conversations about how belonging can become a global norm. And we hope that these conversations only generate more strategies and tactics that help us foster that. So first we start off with something called planning imagination. So these conversations, so you know, are coming from the reading list that we curated. A couple of folks have emailed us and let us know that there is a paywall behind them. And of course, because of Berkeley privilege, I forgot that the link will direct you there. But we have downloaded all of the readings and are going to be made public to everyone. So we want to remove that barrier to access. And again, these are recommended readings. They're just kind of curating some of the thoughts that are out there to prepare these conversations, but they're not required readings for you to come to the seminars. In the essay Towards the Planning Imagination, author Leonie Sandercock states that planning is a social project whose purpose is to manage the way in which people coexist in a way that celebrates and acknowledges the pluralities that are now true for many of the cities of the 21st century. She argues that planning education has not prepared planners for this new form of coexistence, and this calls for a new planning education. Sandercock calls for planning imagination that is political, audacious, creative, and therapeutic. We as planners have been taught to be observers of the built environment, a so-called neutrality, they might call it, but yet we as planners are participants in this ecology, so we operate from a place where objectivity can't work. Planning has always been political, and we as planners now have to ask ourselves, who are we committed to? When we are trained as planners, we are asked to seek a specialization, whether it's transportation, land use, or community development. Yet community members don't experience the built environment in silos. It's important that so much of what we do as planners, it's important to know that what we do as planners is based on social construction. The world we live in was someone's imagination. But we as planners have the ability to imagine. And like I asked before, who are you committed to? I now ask, who are you imagining for? It is important to also remember that planning is powerful, from the distribution of capital and resources to deciding over the use of land, something that inherently does not belong to us. Planning is powerful. I say all that to say that while planning as a field operates within systems of power, if there's anything that Kimberly Crenshaw has taught us, is that power never works alone and it operates to benefit those of us that it oppresses. I always think of my layman's test for equity is this. If I say intersectionality and the first thing that comes to mind is infrastructure and not Kimberly Crenshaw, are we really doing equity work? Let me tell you, there's a lot of people who are in the business of equity and yet don't know how to do it. And then lastly, in the essay, Planning as a Heterosexist Project, author Frisch argues that planning is a social project that only seeks to promote heterosexuality while discriminating against queer identity. Now, Frisch makes it clear that planning doesn't explicitly discriminate against queerness, but rather planning as a project, the work of linking systemic structures and representation. Rather than specifically writing policies that openly discriminate against queer folk, urban planning as a heterosexist project focuses on the discourse of sexual difference as it formulates what order versus disorder, public versus private, and family versus household is, how it is defined. It's important to note that the social project is not just limited to heterosexism. It is true for white supremacy, capitalism, settler colonialism, patriarchy, etc. Planning is informed by the discourses that surround each of these systems of power and oppression. Power dynamics are not neutral. They must be challenged and transformed, and we as planners have the capacity to help change those. So some of the examples that we have been doing at OBI and from what we heard in the field, we have been working in our transportation work to incorporate more radical imagination in the way we imagine transportation. Mostly, sometimes when we think about applying equity, we think about either atoning for past harms, redistribution of economic resources, and representation. And all of these strategies are valid. But what happens when the whole system is at flawed? We need to reimagine new ways and new relationships to mobility and transportation. So what we did in one of our last works, our evaluation on state equity pilot programs through CARD, the California Air Resources Board. We just put out our evaluation. Feel free to check it out at OBI website. If you want to know more, let me know and I'll forward it to you. We also did a Leaders in Residence program where we engaged with 9 leaders across the state of California to undergo this radical imagination process. We have conversations about what imagination is, what that looks like. We engage in a couple of activities that kind of operate in the field of radical imagination. We had folks engage in a Theater of the Oppressed workshop, inspired by the work of Augusto Boal. We had folks engage in what's called the Peoplehood Matrix, which is something that comes from American Indigenous Studies. And we also worked on something called Visionary Fictions, where we wrote these short stories around a different relationship to urban planning. We put all of these together in a zine called Radical Imagination and Transportation Planning, which is also available online. And let me know if you would like to see it. And what we did for this one, we included some of more than just having an annotated agenda for you to follow along and maybe lead something like this in your own work. We also added our thoughts, reflections, and responses to these prompts. In addition, we commissioned 4 works of art with community members to asking the question, how do we radically reimagine transportation? We have been doing a lot of community-based work in just transition planning, preparing for post-fossil fuel economies. We've been having conversations around the impacts of ending single-family zoning for housing. We asked ourselves, what are the boundaries between the public sphere and the economy, and how those are changing and must change, specifically around the work of community land trusts supported by local policy, community benefit agreements, etc. So this is, again, a little bit of the introductory descent. I'll now present our speakers. I'm first going to hand it off over to Veronica. And so Veronica O. Davis is a director of city programs for Atkins Realis. Veronica has nearly 20 years of experience in engineering and transportation planning. She is an entrepreneur and civil engineer, co-founding Inspire Green LLC, which manages community, multimodal transportation, and environmental planning and consulting. While at Inspire Green, she led the Vision Zero action plans for Washington, D.C. and the city of Alexandria. She co-founded Black Women Bike, an organization and movement which builds a community and interest in biking among Black women through education, advocacy, and recreation. Veronica was recognized as a champion of change by the White House in 2012 for her professional accomplishments in advocacy. I'll hand it over to you, Veronica. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. I hope you can see my slides and hear me okay. If I can get a thumbs up, we're doing good. Awesome. So as mentioned, I am Veronica Davis. I wrote a book. I have my email here, veronica.davis@atkinsrealis.com. You can find me on the socials, Twitter, I am Veronica O. Davis, IG as well, and then my personal website. I'm okay. Please feel free to throw stuff in the chat while I'm talking. You can give me a snap, thumbs up, like, yo, me too, all of that good stuff. And I will do my best to keep this accessible because I recognize not everyone lives in this transportation nerded world that I live in. So I will do my best to make this accessible. So here's just the cover of my book, Inclusive Transportation, a manifesto for repairing divided communities. And through the table of contents, I have a forward by Tamika Butler. Some of you in Los Angeles may know Tamika very well. I'm really honored that she wrote the forward. In the preface, I talk about just my process of writing and the doubt that comes in of who am I to introduce my book to the planning world, particularly as a planning student. I mostly read books written by white men. And so, but I never questioned their qualifications. So why am I questioning mine? In the introduction, I give the state of transportation, how we got where we are as an industry. And then I have the 6 main chapters. Number 1 is transportation is personal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that this morning. Equity is more than a baseball graphic. And I loved the definition and discussion around equity. I have a slightly different take on that. Number 3 is should there be a war on cars? I don't answer the question, spoiler. And 4, I talk about power, influence, and the complexity of people. And with that, I talk about the silently suffering, and I'll go into that a little bit more detail during my talk. And then 5 is bringing it all together. How do we truly infuse the planning and the engagement process to be one process? And then lastly, it's my kind of I call it the chicken little, ringing the bell of a call to action of the things that are truly are threatening the transportation industry, and particularly the people that I consider the silently suffering. So why I do what I do. I know in my bio it talks about Vision Zero. And for those of you that have not heard, it is about eliminating traffic-related deaths and serious injuries. In this nation, we are killing people with motor vehicles. And unfortunately, it is one of the ways you can kill someone and never see jail time. And this in particular, this image is a ghost bike. And so for those of you that don't know, it's typically installed when a person who has been biking has been struck and killed in a traffic crash. This actually is a ghost bike of my friend Dave, where he was struck and killed by a motorist. And it was interesting that the headlines and the language was, oh, but he was wearing a helmet. And it's like, that's cool, but we need to prevent people from dying. And we know that speed is the thing that is killing people, even people in motor vehicles. The other thing, so this is a graph that shows the causes of death of children and adolescents. And so up until 2020, motor vehicle crashes was the number 1 killer of children ages 1 to 19. And the only reason why it's not number 1 right now is because they keep shooting people in schools. And so this is a problem. It is a problem nationwide with guns, which we won't get into today. But motor vehicles, it is the number 1 cause of, killer of children. And I definitely come from a belief that we should be building cities for children and their ability to move independently around. And then when we talk about race and ethnicity, so this is Dangerous by Design from the Complete Streets Coalition. They should have a new updated version of this coming out in 2024, but it talks about the pedestrian deaths per 100,000. And what we see is people who are Black, American Indian or Native, Alaskan Native are overrepresented in these deaths. And again, this is why I am passionate about this work. And so this comes down to, how did we design our system? How did we even get here? This is a quote, and I will read it in case others are unable to see it. But this is a quote in 1931. This was the first quote I was able to find about the American dream. And it's a quote from James Adams that says, "Life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement." And that's a really great sentiment that we should all aspire to. But when you look at the American dream, and this is just a screenshot of my computer, and feel free to, Google it yourself so that you can see it clearer. But I just Googled American Dream ads. And what you will see is a white family, a mom, a dad, a little boy, a little girl, some type of an animal, dog or cat. And they'll either be in front of their house with the white picket fence, or they'll be in a vehicle. And the American dream was really about a very specific group of people. And even, I know sometimes, particularly for younger people, we can look at things with a 2024 lens. But in the 1930s, white was a very specific group of people. You had people who were of Italian, Irish, Hungarian, descent. They were not considered white at the time. There were protective covenants between those groups of people. So it wasn't black and white and how we look at it today. And so the American dream was extremely specific. there's one picture when you look at this kind of Google image, and it has this ad in the background with the same family and their dog, and it says world's highest standard of living. There's no way but like the American way. And in the foreground, there are people standing in line, mostly Black people. And this is 1937, so they're standing in line for food. And so it's really this juxtaposition of how we define the American dream and who it was really built for. And so, as I mentioned, in chapter 1, I talk about transportation is personal. And this is where I will share my family's personal story. This is a map of 1960 of East Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And like planners, many of us, I'm guilty of doing the kind of blotted line of how people could move or how we could do these things. Well, this is the planners that were planning the route for Interstate 10, which connects Florida to California. And as you zoom in a little closer, there's a little parcel. And so I have two arrows. The arrow that is pointing north, that is a house that was owned by my great grandmother. And the arrow that's pointing east, that is where the house that my grandparents owned, where my mother grew up. And so, in this neighborhood at the time was mostly Black and Italian. And, as the planners were trying to figure out where to put this highway, this is where they decided to put this highway. And so this next slide is a photo. On the left is a photo of my uncle in front of my great grandmother's house. As a child, for me, as a child, I visited my great grandmother's house underneath the highway. Her house was the only house that was not taken from the block. So she was left alone underneath the highway. And that house existed until I was about 8 or 9 years old. On the right is a photo from 2022 of that same parcel, and that community is gone. Interestingly enough, they now call this whole parcel Expressway Park as a means to reconnect the community. And the problem is the community is gone. The entire block of people are gone. And for me, this serves as a reminder as a planner. I think oftentimes we go into communities and we forget that there are people alive today that remember what the community was before the highway got there. My mother is very much in her right mind, and she remembers growing up in this house. Their house was taken when she was in high school. So this was the house that she grew up in. And she's alive today and she remembers. And so there's a lot of ongoing trauma in these communities. And so this is just a visual of what it looks like. And you see there's just a corner store that's left now, an Expressway Park. And so, how does that get us back to pedestrian deaths? Often it is in these same areas is where we see these very ridiculously wide roads. And I'm going to tell you, I'm at the point in my career, you can show me a map of the high injury network without even looking. Without even looking at what the road is, I can tell you who lives in the neighborhood, and I can tell you what type of a road it is because it's usually the same. This is a photo from Tucson, Arizona, and you see and I took this photo. It's a very wide street that, you have a school bus that is trying to stop traffic. And, the interesting thing about this, this is what I call the silently suffering, and that is this person who is waiting to pick up their child at the school bus. That is what I consider the silently suffering, the people who are attempting to get through life day after day. And they often don't have the power or the political influence to truly have their needs addressed. And so that's where, as a planner, and even as my role when I was at the city of Houston, attempting to do my best to get out and reach to these communities and truly try to address their needs. But embarrassingly enough, in the short time I was there, I was not able to do, I wasn't able to do everything. I wasn't able to fix everything. And this is a typical street we see in Houston. This is a person in a wheelchair that is using the street in order to navigate her community. And it's because we don't have sidewalks in this particular community. And there's plenty of neighborhoods around Houston that don't have sidewalks. And so when I think about the silently suffering, it is people like this who are just attempting to move through their neighborhood and they are unable to. This is a photo I took in Charleston, South Carolina. And this woman is actually walking to a bus. Again, there's no sidewalks. So we've built this public transit system and we've provided no way for people to get there. And then we say, no one's riding the bus. Yes, they are riding the bus. And particularly people who have to go through all of these things to get there, this is what they're attempting to do. And then even, this is a photo from Rockville, Maryland. And I know I've seen the list of people on this call, at least for the American cities. I know you have a road that looks like this in your city. And I know this is where people are dying in your city. And we can pat ourselves on the back because we have created a complete street. And what a complete street it means is that we've provided space for everyone. There's a beautiful wide sidewalk. So I just complained on the other pictures, there's no sidewalk. There's this beautiful wide sidewalk. There is transit that operates on this street. And yet people die on this street. And the reason is it is wide. You see the number of lanes. It is about an 8-lane footprint, which means that people are going to be driving fast. It is, and these type of roads, you will see transit stops that are at places where people can't get across the street. And we'll say in the news, once they get struck and killed, oh, they weren't crossing at a crosswalk. But that crosswalk is a half a mile away. And not everyone, when that bus is coming and you miss that bus and another one's not coming for 30 minutes, you're going to go across the street, the path of least resistance. And so this is what I talk about in my book. And my hope is that we can look at things differently and have a different vision for our outcome. And so that is just the framework I'm going to start with. And with that, I will turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Veronica. I will admit this is not an outfit change. I was just sweating in the sweatshirt I was wearing. So I was like, let me take this off. With that, I'm gonna introduce now our second speaker, Dr. Kafui Atto. Dr. Kafui Atto is an associate professor of urban studies at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies and an affiliated faculty member of the Earth and Environmental Sciences Department at the CUNY Graduate Center. He is the author of Rights in Transit, Public Transportation, and the Right to the City in California's East Bay, as well as Disrupting DC, The Rise of Uber and the Fall of the City. Professor Atto received his BA from Macalester College and his PhD in geography from Syracuse University. His broad interests are in the political economy of cities, the politics of public space, and debates in and around the idea of the right to the city. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Kafui Atto.
Great, thanks so much. So before I begin my remarks, and I'll try to keep it short so that we leave enough time for the breakout, discussion and then Q&A. I wanted to just thank Richard Aviles and Eli Moore, as well as Mylana, and everyone else at the Othering and Belonging Institute for helping to put this on and for inviting me. Just judging by the number of RSVPs and the number of people who are here, I don't think I've ever spoken to this size of this size of an audience. So I'm just incredibly honored. So I was asked by Richard and Eli to talk a bit about, and Richard mentioned this, what Liani Sandercock has described as the desperate need for a new planning imagination, an approach to planning that celebrates and acknowledges the pluralities of the 21st century city and that seeks to redress some of the excesses and violations of the past, many of which were mentioned by Veronica just now. Of course, part of sketching that out means both defining what exactly we mean by planning, as well as what skills and competencies this or other new approaches to urban planning might or should entail. It also means identifying some of the pitfalls and barriers that planners, however progressively minded or radical, will invariably face in developing a new approach to planning our cities. So in taking up these questions, I thought I'd begin with a couple of quotes, which I think, despite being pretty old quotes, are nevertheless thought-provoking and worth meditating on. The first quote is from Aaron Wildavsky, who was a public policy theorist at Berkeley for many decades, and it's from an essay he published in 1973 called "If Planning is Everything, Maybe It's Nothing." The essay, which you can see in the PowerPoint, is something of a critique of post-war planning, but it starts on a pretty empathetic or sympathetic note. Planners, he argues, have it tough, is basically the message. I don't know if we all agree, but we'll see. Where planning does not measure up to expectations, planners are handy targets. They are both too ambitious or they have not been ambitious enough. They have perverted their calling by entering politics, or they have been insensitive to the political dimensions of their task. They ignore cultural mores, or they capitulate to the blind forces of irrationality. They pay too much attention to one sector of the economy while ignoring analysis of individual projects, or they spend so much time on specific matters that they are unable to deal with the economy as a whole. In short, planners have difficulty in explaining who they are and what they should be expected to do. If they are supposed to doctor sick societies, the patient never seems to get well. There's another quote that I really like from about the same time that I think is even more provocative. This is a quote from the sociologist Ray Paul, and it comes from an essay he published in 1975 called "Whose City?" The essay was actually turned into a whole book, and it's a great book. It's maybe at your library. It came out in 1975, but I think you can find a PDF online. For Paul, the only thing worse than plans that failed to live up to expectations were plans that met them. Let me just planners, he argued, are expected to make our life better, quote unquote. But if they succeed, they may be resented because people are thereby being deprived of the freedom to plan their own lives for themselves. I like these quotes because they point to a set of anxieties and paradoxes that I think remain for many planners, although I'm curious to see if that's actually true in the Q&A. I also like the quotes because they offer a glimpse at a different time, and Veronica touched on some of this, but both Wildavsky and Paul were writing at the tail end of a 3-decade period. This is the post-war period in which the American city was radically transformed. Yes. From the passage of the 1949 Housing Act, the construction of the interstate system, the rollout of federal urban renewal and slum clearance programs, the expansion of public housing, and the explosion of privately owned automobiles, all of them had conspired to give urban planners and urban developers unprecedented powers. By the 1970s, when Wildavsky and Paul were writing, the dust had settled and it wasn't pretty. The city had been torn apart and racial divisions had only deepened. Today, urban planners, fed on a steady diet of Jane Jacobs and new urbanist principles, look back in horror and ask, what have we done? How are we so mistaken? And what can we do to make up for it? Ironically, the idea that urban planners make our life better seems rather quaint now and old-fashioned. At the same time, it's also clear that the absence of large-scale urban renewal style planning has not indeed come with new freedoms or new abilities to plan our own lives. We live in cities that are still planned, but they are increasingly planned by capital and real estate, and often with planners as junior partners rather than in the driver's seat. And the resentment remains, even if the target is less planners than it is gentrifiers or bike lanes or developers or capitalism in general. This is the argument that Sam Stein makes in his book Capital City, which I just really think is a great book. Today, it seems the issue is not simply that large-scale planning is failing to meet expectations, but that our expectations of planning, and especially of large-scale public planning, remain exceedingly low. So I say all this as a preamble to discuss what I think a new planning imagination might entail, what it would mean to raise expectations for planning, what pitfalls and barriers planners face in realizing the changes they'd like to see. And I thought I'd just give an example from my first book, which is about transit in the Bay Area. So this is a map of the B line. The B line is Berkeley's own municipal transit system. It operates a total of 7 routes, all of them about the same length. Red line takes you up Telegraph Avenue. Blue line runs down to Berkeley's 4th Street Business District. The purple line is the Shasta Grizzly Loop and takes you up to the Berkeley Hills. The green line connects downtown Berkeley with the city of Emeryville. It's a really great system and fares are pretty low. Of course, if you are at all familiar with Berkeley, you'll know that everything I just said is a complete lie, and there's no such thing as the B line. In 2010, however, when I was doing the research for the book, maps like this one were everywhere. They were in Berkeley, Oakland, and Richmond, and everywhere in between. And I remember getting my own copy at a protest in downtown Oakland that had been organized in response to a set of proposed service cuts at AC Transit. Since I'd come to study the transit issue, I immediately wanted to figure out what is this thing that I've just stumbled upon. Fortunately enough for me, the map came with a link to a website, and the website had a link to the map's creator, one Kristen Lawson. It took about a month, but I eventually was able to track this guy down for an interview, and the interview was fantastic. First thing that Lawson said about the B line was this: it's 100% a dream. There's no reality to it. It may look like it's official, but that's because I'm very good at making things look official. But all it is one lunatic, that's me, coming up with an idea, making a whole route map, designing it as if it were a real bus system, and then just announcing that it's real and having public meetings. If enough people assume that it's real, then it becomes real. That's how things happen in the world. This is what I call the field of dreams approach to urban planning. So taking a step back, and to be totally fair to Kristen Lawson, there were at least 2 big picture things that he wanted to communicate to me when we did the interview. The first was that none of this was set in stone. This was simply an opening gambit. It was a provocation. I understand that this is the quote. I understand that everyone is going to come out and say, this should go there, and this line is stupid, and my house is there. And everyone is going to argue. I don't care about the details. I just want to get it going. And if you all want to wrestle about the details for how it's funded, wrestle away. For Lawson, the B line was above all about getting a conversation going. It was about encouraging people simply to imagine a different type of transit system, one that was more in line with people's needs. So that's the first thing. The second big picture thing that Lawson wanted to communicate when we were doing the interview was that none of this was political. For Lawson, the B line was not about politics. Politics was the problem. Problem is that in Berkeley and probably other places, this is the quote, transit becomes politics. Everything gets intertwined with all these political agendas, and I just want to stay away from that. Moreover, he wanted to stay away from social justice. When people say social justice, they don't really care about buses or transportation. They want transit as like an implement of the revolution. The B line, according to Lawson, was not about any of that. It was not about draining the coffers of the wealthy for some revolutionary purpose. It was not about oppression or rights. It was not about social justice. It was about simply making something that worked for everybody. In expanding the planning imagination, I like this example because on one hand, I think Lawson is kind of correct that there is a desperate need to think radically about transportation systems. And part of doing that means finding new ways to excite people and raise expectations about what is possible and what planning can do. On the other hand, and given everything we know about how the world works, I like this example because it's also incredibly wrong. Anyone who is serious about change or about expanding the planning imagination, they have to engage in politics. The question is, what type of politics? So I could go on and on about the beeline. I won't. I'll just point to two areas where I think, in my own, since writing the first book and now doing stuff around transportation workers, especially with respect to Uber, two areas that I think are worth exploring in terms of how planners might engage politically. The first is labor and labor organizations as generators of planning ideas. I've been teaching for the last 15 years at the Cuny School of Labor and Urban Studies. And so all my students are union workers. Many of them work for the MTA as bus drivers or subway conductors. And they have deep, important ideas about how to plan the system, but rarely are their voices heard. The second area is around data and the platform economy. I think the platform economy, especially things like Uber and Lyft, offer a opportunity as well as a risk in terms of the information they have about cities. It's an opportunity because they have information that might be useful to planners. It's a risk because the way they produce that data often invariably relies on exploited and underemployed labor. So I thought I'd end with these two quotes just because I really like them. As I got the question from Richard, I was like, how am I going to talk about all this? And these are the things that I found. I find them provocative because they suggest that whether planners are successful or not, they will remain handy targets. If they succeed, they will be blamed. If they fail, they will be blamed. And I think this is interesting because in some ways it might be liberating and to free up planners to embrace a transformative politics and build solidarity with others, because they're going to get someone angry. It's just who. So those are my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Coffee. Thank you so much to both of you for those presentations. I see we have a hand up, so we'll take this question and then we'll move into our breakout. Suzette, yes.
Thank you so much for these presentations. I'm learning so much from listening to you both. My question is about food apartheid, food deserts, and the ability for communities to be able to plan their own food and their food needs. I understand that, urban planners get blamed for the problems that exist in the communities, and one of them is food access. So I'm just wondering, who are the people who make the decisions about, convenience stores and liquor stores, and where are the leverage points to improve food access in invested communities?
Thank you so much for that question, Suzette. I want to make sure, Mailana, if you can let me know when we're ready for the breakout group. Sorry, I'm just gonna handle that logistic thing real quick. I wonder if Veronica and Coffee can speak specifically to food sovereignty and food justice. What comes to mind, Suzette, in the question that you asked is, who are the decision makers? And I think a lot of the times we know that we operate within the state. I come from an organizing background where I was taught to organize contra, desde, y sin el Estado, which translates to within, without, and against the state. And though urban planning has me operating within the state many times, my spirit will always be against it. So I definitely believe in the power of chisme, in the power of gossip as strategic information. And even if I'm working within the state, letting folks know who are organizing outside of the state to be like, let me tell you about this fool out here in his voting record. I'm using his pronouns very intentionally because a lot of times it's men. who get in the way of these processes. But I think it's about how do we hold them accountable and not being afraid. Like in the essay on planning imagination, Sandra talks about being audacious in the sense of we also can be organizers in some ways, right? Like we also can, given the privilege that we have in understanding the system of bureaucracy and the way that it operates, there is definitely a way to organize and like let people know and help people strategize, I think, around the ways in which decision making happens and how to hold folks accountable in that regard. I don't know, Veronica or Coffee, if I want to add something to that. And Anastasia, I see your hand.
Yeah,
Um,
oh, sorry.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Anastasia. Hello, my name is Anastasia, and I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I don't know if anybody knows this just yet, but here in Albuquerque, we have made our bus transit free for everybody. But next thing for us is working on safety, and especially when it comes to a homeless population that is increasing, and being able to kind of help out with everybody no matter where they come from. I'm proud to say that Albuquerque is a melting pot, but yes, we do have our struggles. And I guess one thing I would say is that how one of the reasons why we have transit, like free transit, is thanks to our other nonprofit organization that we work with. Their name is Together for Brothers, and they really advocated and really pushed forward for free transit for everybody. And we're collaborating with them to working on having more keeping our free transit, because the best way to have affordable transit is free transit, and just being able to come together as a community. So I guess one of the things I would kind of push out is work with your nonprofits and communicate with your nonprofits and advocate for your nonprofits just as much as your nonprofits are willing to work with you. But I guess my next and I learned a lot from you guys and the planning, and it's been really insightful to kind of have an understanding of our own homes, of what happens and what goes on and what's in kind of the back burner and what's going on. I guess my question would be, is there a way for planners to work with nonprofits to be able to engage within the community and to be able to support voices more? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Anastasia.
Yeah.
Veronica,
Can I
do you want-
answer? I'll answer very quickly because I know we have breakout groups. One of the great things with the bipartisan infrastructure law, and so for those of you that don't know, that was, Congress came together and the Biden administration got it over the line to have investment, really historic investment in infrastructure in this nation. And one of the important policy things that came out of it is now you can use federal funds to pay people and organizations for their time. That was a thing that you could not do before. So if someone is working on, at least in the transportation side, a transportation plan that is funded by the federal government, you can now use money, you can use federal funds to pay organizations, pay people, buy food, pay for childcare, pay for transportation. And so I really want to give credit to USDOT and many of the people that made that happen moving forward. It's not everything, but it is a huge step forward to even be able to use the funds in that way.
Thank you for that. So now we're going to move into breakout groups. And the breakout groups are a couple, the intention for the breakout groups are a couple. Somebody in the chat added that the chat felt like an Olympic sport. Yes, there's a lot of conversation going on in the chat. So we want to take the next 15 minutes. So one, you can meet each other and just kind of have an opportunity to network. It's a very digital way of doing it, but we wanted to for folks to be randomized and want to process some of the things that come up. Feel free to share with each other some of the things that are arising and various sort of answers that you want to, process together. And then also think of any questions. We're hoping that this space allows for that processing to happen. And then after 15 minutes, we'll come back and we'll have a larger Q&A question. There's a bunch of questions that are also in the chat. And so we'll try to compile some of those questions. And then once we finish with the Q&A, I will share some more details about our next seminar and then questions that I've seen about obtaining some of the resources that we've mentioned and some of the presentations shared today. So with that, Mailana, feel free to send folks into the breakout groups and we'll come back at 12:10. Good to see folks coming back in. We'll give it some time as the breakout rooms are closing. For this last section, feel free to start getting some of your questions ready. We'll take the 15 minutes for a Q&A. So folks are still coming in. Yeah, all y'all rolling in now. Just a couple of the reflections from both Veronica's and Coffee's presentation. We were talking earlier before we joined on that to me, it feels like a lot of the times urban planning, and this is rooted in sort of my own spiritual practices and the work that I've done and what I've known, that urban planning truly is about restoring the sacred relationship between body and earth. And it feels like the current iteration of urban planning through economics and policies and the examples that were both brought up by Veronica and Coffee, this iteration has worked very hard to tether that relationship. In one of the upcoming seminars on embodiment, we will be talking about the technologies that literally exist within our bodies that allow us to spatially navigate, from proprioceptors, which are the neurons in our bodies that let us know how much space we take up in space, from spatial navigation, from emotional intelligence. All of these relationships really are about restoring that sacred relationship between body and earth. It has come up in many civilizations throughout times in history. That relationship, again, between body and earth is very important and sacred. Yet somehow this iteration of planning has, again, tethered that relationship. I'm thinking a lot about what Veronica mentioned and at the root of that presentation being story. And again, so much of how many of us, there's a lot of planners who show up with lived experience. I think another thing that comes up is having a conversation about the secondary trauma we assume and get, and the ways that we move with urgency and the ways that other planners do not move with urgency. There's something about Sandra Cox's essay where she talks about being audacious. It truly is being okay and asking questions. In our third seminar, we will ask the question about at what moment does the urban planner become held accountable? It's held accountable. At what moment do we as planners undergo research, do the data collection, do the engagement, et cetera, only for then a project to be shelved? What do we do as planners? Do we sit back and just let it get shelved, or do we organize and agitate? Again, I come from an organizing background, so people know that I love to fight, and maybe it's because I come from the hood. I get an itch to fight all the time. So the greatest joy of my job is really fighting institutions. And so with that being said, I open up the floor to you all. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand and then we'll do a little bit of a queue. Yeah. Yes, Fatima.
Hey, is there a way, because I mean, obviously the chat, the breakout rooms, like there's so much energy behind it. Our group was really talking about that as well. Is there something throughout this that's like more of a facilitated connection session? Like, how are we, like, this is a movement that was brewing of almost 700 people here, like actively on a wave. So how do we tap into it? I don't know. This is powerful.
100%. Thank you for bringing that up. I am willing to take feedback and recommendations as how we can do that. yeah, I will have to check in with the rest of the team because the capacity, y'all, like I'm being hella transparent. It's like 3 people of us putting these seminars together, and there's a series of 9 seminars. So we'll be going strong, hopefully through the end of 2024. It's once a month. And in between times, I think there's a way to maybe either conversations or even office hours. I don't know what that looks like yet, full transparency, but I'm definitely open to taking up suggestions and feedback. And thank you so much for calling this a movement. I see Luis his hand up. I don't know, Shada, maybe you had your hand up. No, okay, cool. Luis.
Yeah, when I started this from Los Angeles, and just wanted to thank everybody for the presentations and all the information. Maybe another way to kind of build on what the sister just said, as far as kind of getting everything kind of fragmented, or not fragmented, but like segmented, maybe having like a regional breakdown of, you know, a list of like, oh, these people are calling from Cali, or from, we met somebody from Rhode Island, from Minnesota, and then breaking it down into like what they do, maybe like by, these folks do mobility, these folks do arts, these folks do this, that, and the third. So just to kind of, make it like a yellow pages for folks to reach out to people. That way they don't have to continue to sift through. As a person who runs a coalition in Los Angeles, we kind of break that down for folks in that way. But again, really wanted to appreciate all of y'all for opening the door for us to be able to do this, because again, it was like a mini like organizing session. And I'll reach out to all the folks that gave me their contact. So I appreciate y'all for that.
Thank you so much. One suggestion that I see in the chat that I think could be manageable is a Discord. Discord is a server platform. Some of y'all don't know this, but we almost did a session on urban planning and video games because on my off time, she's a gamer, but that's another conversation. But usually Discords allow for different channels. So we can do channels by region, by method. So there's possibly there. One thing that will come up for sure. So these presentations, I'm writing essays based on the presentations with these takeaways from the presentation and the discussion that will be shared out with folks for sure. So there's definitely going to be a follow-up email to everyone who registered with some of the resources we talked today. Again, like I mentioned, we'll also share out a Dropbox link that will have all of the readings outside of the paywall for the rest of the seminars as well. Any other questions that come up? Yes, Luis Q.
I just had a quick question. When there was a conversation happening about the federal infrastructure, but bipartisan federal infrastructure bill, I'm really interested as a planner in trying to find out more about how we can like compensate people for the work they're doing towards their own liberation. And that's been a struggling point for us. Every answer we always get is like, oh, federal guidelines don't allow it. Our hands are tied. We can't even get gift cards because you can't pay people for a particular service. Yeah, you got to go through this whole thing. And so we have to continuously ask for people to volunteer. And so I'm really interested in knowing more about the structure if you have it. To digest and be able to see if I can create that structure for where I work.
Veronica, do you feel like this maybe is a question you could tackle?
Yeah. What I will do is, since I believe you have everyone's email, right, for that registered. So I will share the link for the federal guidance. This is a new update, so no one's trying to pull a fast one on you. The federal government just sent out guidance. It was maybe summer of last year to just clarify these things, and that again included paying people for their time, paying people for food and childcare as it relates to a specific project to get people to come to public meetings and as part of the public engagement process. But I will make sure that gets shared.
Thank you so much. Any other questions that come up?
Hello, I'm Deborah Gill. I came in late and I was wondering, is it possible to get some of the earlier slides or anything like that? Can that be sent out?
Yes, that will be sent in a follow-up conversation email.
Thank you
Sorry.
kindly.
Of course, Deborah. Thank you for joining us. Samuel.
Hi, thank you so much, both of you, for all the presentations. Really fantastic information. I've noticed in this field, there's a really great impulse to learn from each other, across the country. But then sometimes we get into traps of applying everything to, localities, regardless of what it looks like on the ground. And so, for instance, I'm in Portland. I think, in theory, transit-oriented development is great, but the way that the main mass transit system here developed was directly along the existing freeways. And so if you are, putting more and more density along that route, that means more and more people exposed to pollution from freeways. So, I guess, what is your solution for balancing the national best practice with acknowledging the realities in the localities?
So I'll say this. I think it's a couple things. I think for me, you always have to take into context that particular neighborhood. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What is the specific need of that neighborhood? And that's where, we talk about equity. It's giving people what they need. And a very specific example, there is a road in DC where I used to live, and it's on the high entry network. And so best practice is, well, we could put a bike lane. And the community balked at that idea. But it's not that they were against biking. It's, my need is, I ride the bus and it doesn't show up on time. And if it does show up, it's packed and I can't get on. And so you have to address the need. And so until you address that transit need, people, they can't even hear you about the bike. And so I think that's important. But what I will say is important for this coalition of people, it's to share kind of tactics and what you all have done, LA in passing HLA, which will be funding for public transit, walking and biking. You guys would take that template and share it with your friends. Hey, Denver, hey, Miami, hey, whoever, here's this template that we had to get this funding. And, be okay with, people, sharing that information. In addition, on the downside, it's important to keep these conversations going, because things are cropping up that will prevent the things that our communities need. As an example, Indianapolis, I think there was a law that was just created that they can't do any more bus rapid transit. You have Florida, where laws are now created that to even add bike lanes, transit lanes, or sidewalks, it's all these hoops and hurdles now that communities need to go through. In Texas, it didn't pass, but I know it's going to come back, would be preventing of road diets. And that essentially means slimming down the road. So you all need to communicate, because these things are just tests that are happening in different parts of the nation, which then they want to make national policy. So I think it's important to just keep this conversation going.
100%. I totally agree with you, Veronica. And I think one of the things that is missing, in my opinion, is the planner as archivist, the planner as curious, and the planner as anthropologist. I think very similar to what Veronica said, it goes back to the question of who are we committed to? I think there's something about I call it the purgatory of but the way in which we as planners operate with a sense of a lot of power, where in so many ways we represent capital C community, but we don't. There is an ability to really do the work to understand what are the needs of a neighborhood and the community that we're in service to, and also understanding some more of these macro scale frameworks to then better understand and be strategic about the work, right? So if I am in service and I know, now with the new guidelines that Veronica mentioned, let me get a state agency who is trying to be no, we can't pay people for the time. Excuse me, well, here's this new guideline, right? So I think it's always about the strategy also that we bring in as planners. I think a lot of the times planners are also missing that key component that we have as organizers, which is strategy building. Strategy is so important. I think one of my favorite tactics to use, in addition to Veronica and I bonded and kind of nerded out over Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I'm a social worker, so definitely know the framework. But I love power mapping. And everything and every project that I do as a planner, having a power map to really understand the landscape of political positionality, but also decision making, and understanding that my job is to leverage power into seed power. And so really understanding that relationship then allows me to understand which is the political framework with which these plans are being designed. Um, you know what, I think in the Discord we'll add a little chismecito hour, because there's a lot of chisme from the field that folks should know about, and how some of these elected officials be acting fools, but that's another conversation. So a little bit of that, Samuel, I don't know if that helps. If anyone else has any other questions, we'll take one more just because of time, and I'll give you some more information about our next seminar. Eleanor.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Not really a question, but kind of a celebration and elevation of what's going on in the chat. There's been a whole lot of energy of people throwing in their contact information to talk specifically about how arts and cultural work intersects with reparative planning. And I just want to signal boost the heck out of that, of, you know, if you are a planner on this call, community engagement or economic development person on this call, and you are not thinking about the ways to integrate artists and cultural workers in your communities into your work, please do so. And this is apparently a wealth of folks that are doing that work. I know my team in Atlanta is really focused on that with the Atlanta Regional Commission, but just wanted to signal boost that and celebrate it because I think it's crucial.
Thank you, Eleanor. I think that's the perfect segue. So just so you know, save the date, May 2nd at the same time at 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Our second seminar will be on urban planning and arts and cultural strategy, but we are moving away from arts and culture as mural and products, but more as process. So we are asking ourselves not what is the role of art in urban planning, but rather what is the art of urban planning? And beyond just being a profession that is rooted in the transaction of land, that's my personal opinion, how can urban planning also be a cultural strategy? Again, we as planners, there's a relationship between the ways in which people create identity, for the ways identities are formulated, and the spaces that we come from, right? Like I'm from South Central, and you put a bunch of people from the hood together, we speak common language, right? And that's because collectively there's this inherent relationship. And so we ask ourselves in this next seminar, how can urban planning also shift a paradigm, right? How do we talk about urban planning as cultural strategy and cultural work? With that being said, thank you to Veronica, to Dr. Coffey, to the rest of the Othering and Belonging Institute for helping put all of this together. We were not expecting so many of y'all show up. Now I'm gonna go take a nap, listen to some more Beyonce, and then get working on the next steps because y'all gave me more work. Again, thank you so much. In the chat, I will add my contact information, so you feel free to reach out at any moment throughout now and then. And if you have any comments or questions and feedback around how we can generate some of this work and continue the conversations between the seminars, so more than happy to do so. Just so you're out there, some of you follow me on social media and not cute, but there you go. My email is there and also social media handles. So feel free to reach out. And in that case, I'm going to share some music to let us go. Have a wonderful day, everybody.